There's a Mets here for all your Mets here. Let's go. Bring it home. Bring it home. Bring it home Make it happen. There's no stopping us now. We're gonna do it again. It's not a question of how. It's just a matter. It's just a matter. It's just a matter of when.
Hello again, everybody. Joe Piscopo, Shea Stadium. The big story. Mets 86. Exciting, thrilling, awesome. Let's take a look.
Do it. Do We got the teamwork to make the dream work. We got the teamwork to make the dream work. We got the teamwork to make the dream work. Ooh, we got the teamwork to make the dream work. We're gonna make it this time. We're gonna take it home.
What's up, Met fans? Welcome back to Talking Mets with Rob and another Mets Hot Stove Live, January 17th, Tuesday. And we're getting closer and closer to pitchers and catchers, 29 days away until pitchers and catchers report for spring training. And we are getting closer and closer to finalizing the roster, looking ahead about roster breakdown. But the Mets still got questions ever since the Correa saga that lasted nearly a little more, about 3 weeks exactly. So we are in a spot now where there's not much the New York Mets can do because it seems like day by day, the Mets continue to lose out on bats that they could have gotten other than Carlos Correa. After the Correa thing was done, the Mets had Mancini. The Mets had McCutchen, two guys that they were in on, but both of them took deals from other teams. Mancini with the Cubs 2-year deal. I doubt the Mets were going to do that. And also Andrew McCutchen, even though the Mets wanted to give him more money, he wanted to go back home to Pittsburgh, and obviously he would get more playing time with the Pirates than the New York Mets because they're looking for basically a utility guy, a guy who can DH, that can play every now and then, but they're not going to be starting on an everyday basis. And that's why those type of guys like Mancini and McCutchen did not choose to come to the New York Mets because of the fact that, one, with Mancini, the Mets did not want to go probably to 2 years, and they couldn't promise Mancini much playing time, exactly what they couldn't offer Andrew McCutchen. and that was playing time. So now the Mets are stuck with a guy like Duvall, Profar, Pham. Now we heard that Adam Duvall is getting closer and closer to signing with the Boston Red Sox. And that is another issue where he'll probably get more playing time there than the Mets would be able to give him. So here we are right now, and that's why the poll was with two players, Tommy Pham and Jurickson Profar. Obviously, Profar is probably going to win that poll just because of the fact that Profar is probably a better fit for the Mets than Tommy Pham. Profar can play all over the field. He can play outfield. He can play infield. He's a switch hitter. So it gives the Mets a lot of options. But it's just a matter of if these guys are looking for more playing time, they are not going to get it with the New York Mets. And that's where we have a problem because of the fact with the Mets wasting so much time on Correa, it didn't give him time to either negotiate or make other arrangements when it comes to these type of players that the Mets clearly need at this point now. And Billy Eppler had a lot to say today regarding Correa, regarding the bullpen / outfield, and a couple of other things he talked about as well. So where are we? And I think a lot of the things that Eppler said today is leaning towards a certain amount of things that the Mets should be doing. But the problem with the Mets right now, and what Eppler is talking about, is the fact that it seemed like Eppler was basically sitting in the back while Cohen was doing the work. Now, if that was all Cohen making everything happen with Correa and Eppler really didn't have nothing to do with it, well, that's a problem. Because you're paying somebody to do a job, but Cohen, Cohen reminds me of James Dolan. Even though James Dolan, doesn't know his ass from his elbow and always tries to go for the big fish and either loses out or just gets the wrong big guy and the big star. And Cohen is seemingly one of those owners who is like James Dolan of the Knicks, right? He owns the Rangers and owns the Knicks, but puts his nose in everything with the Knicks, but leaves the Rangers alone. And we all know who's been more successful over the last 20 years. So that's what Steve Cohen seems like he's going to be doing. When he doesn't like something that's going on, he will put his nose in it. And Met fans like it now. But you continue, if Cohen is going to continue to have problems with something with Correa where he's not doing his due diligence and making it known that this is what we needed, this is the bat we needed, and then everything falls apart, and then nobody blames Cohen in this aspect. And it becomes a problem for Eppler and what the plan he has set and what he was going to do. Because in all likelihood, we all knew that we were getting Correa 3 weeks ago, but prior to the Mets agreeing to terms with him. And Eppler was looking at the Mancinis, at the Duvalls, at the McCutchens, Profars, and Drurys and stuff like that. So the Mets and Eppler in the front office had a plan. Cohen took it upon himself to do something that the front office didn't even know of until everybody find out on December 21st at 2:30 in the morning. Now, I don't mind Cohen going into, it's his baby, right? It's his team. He owns it. He can do whatever he wants. But great owners, good owners, hire the right people and let them do their job. Remember what Cohen said when he took over the team? He said he's going to hire people that knows what they're doing and lets them do the job. Yeah, he'll have his thoughts, his opinions about everything. And obviously it does come down to his final decision, but he puts the people in place to do their jobs. If you don't let the people do their jobs and you go over their heads on certain things when they had a plan, and no matter what you want to think about Eppler and the front office, they had a plan. And the plan might have not been Correa, but it's not like we all assumed that the Mets were going to get Correa prior to the Giants sign him. It didn't seem likely until the Mets made a late bid for him right before he agreed with the Giants. So my thing my thing with Cohen here is to just Cohen needs to step back a little bit, just open up the pocketbooks, let Billy Eppler do what he was doing, because yes, Billy Eppler had a bad trade deadline, but 2 off seasons in a row, he's done a pretty damn good job, right? Last year with Scherzer, he made a lot of good moves last year. We didn't really think the lefty bullpen was sufficient, but the Mets bullpen wasn't a huge problem last year. The offense was really good up until the August and September. The trade deadline was missing a lot, but both off seasons so far, Eppler did what he had to do. He had to replace guys that left, and he had to sign guys either outside the organization or re-sign guys, and that's what he did. So Eppler, you can't say he's done a terrible job, because you can't kill him for just one trade deadline, even though I thought he did a poor job at the trade deadline last year. Both off seasons, he's done a very good job. Remember, we all going into the off season weren't thinking about Swanson or Correa or Bogarts or any other shortstops that were available. Turner, I was talking about it. Some people were talking about it. The Mets talked about it internally during the 2022 season about pursuing him, but it seems like Turner's mindset was going to Philadelphia. We knew he wanted to come back to the East Coast, but Philly seemed like was more of his destination. So it wasn't really likely the Mets getting after any of those 2 shortstops. So we had to pivot to other things. And what the plan was all right, we got to place deGrom, we got Verlander, right? We needed to place Walker and Bassett, we got Senga, and we got Quintana, right? It's not terrible options, but they are options that could be very good. Quintana is an innings eater. The Mets had that in Bassett. Bassett was very good, but in the big spots, Bassett fell apart. But Bassett was the guy to give you a lot of innings. When you needed that extra inning to save your bullpen, Bassett was there. That's what Jose Quintana is. He's not the greatest pitcher, even though he had a really good year last year, but he's going to be a 4th starter who is going to be an innings guy who eats up innings to save your bullpen. And when you need your bullpen, you can use it amongst the other rotation guys that might need a little bit of during the what they're trying to do, if they're gonna give Verlander and Scherzer not crazy amount of innings early on, and you can use your bullpen. Quintana comes in the mix where he can pitch innings. Senga is obviously the question mark. Can Senga be just as good as Walker? Well, if he's just as good as Walker, then you're not losing anything, and he's getting paid less than Walker. So we're looking at it like that when it comes to. And then you got Carlos Carrasco, who was your 5th starter last year, who is another year older. We don't know what we're going to get from him, but we do have 2 smoking guns in Peterson and McGill if Carrasco isn't ready for that 5th starter's role and is not as good. You got options there. So that's something that the Mets would have to look as well. But the most important thing here, Cohen needs to step back a little bit and let the people do their job. And that's what Cohen said he was going to do. And he's not doing that now. So at this point, not saying that Cohen should step away completely, but he clearly didn't tell the people that he hired to do the job about Correa. He just did it on his own, and that's not the way to do things. Even if the Mets would have got Correa, it makes Billy Eppler feel like he is not like a part of what they're actually doing. The plan was the plan, and then he diverted from that, and Cohen did he's doing it what he thinks best for the organization, but it actually backfired big time. And you know what? It made the Mets look bad. It made Cohen look stupid for opening his mouth, and that's something that is a problem. And not saying that, Cohen probably in the goodness of his heart thought this would have been the big splash. Met fans would have been happy. He wants to make people happy. We all get that. But make sure that you don't do something stupid. And what he did was completely backfired on him, and it made him look bad. And even Eppler today didn't even want to comment about the Correa situation, because what is Eppler going to talk about? Eppler had no knowledge of this. And then when things were getting closer and closer to a disaster, was Eppler really involved in these negotiations? Who the hell knows? But again, the deviation from the plan kind of act like people are on the same different pages, right? Eppler's on this side, Cohen's on this side. If you don't want a GM and you don't want Eppler to follow his plan, because I'm assuming Eppler told Cohen his plan and he was fine with it until, Boris called Cohen in Hawaii. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. There's a lot to go for it. But it's unfortunate that it backfired on us, but you don't know, everybody's starting to blame everybody else. Blame Cohen, because he was the one that put us in this situation where Eppler was basically having his hands tied behind his back when we were wasting our time for 3 weeks trying to sign Correa. So I see people talking about don't disrespect Cohen by comparing him to Dolan. Well, let's think of it this way. Have the Mets won? No, right? The Mets have not won on the Cohen yet, right? Cohen spends a lot of money. Dolan, unfortunately, he has a salary cap, so he can't spend the money he wants to spend. But Dolan does put a lot of money into GMs and coaching and players sometimes that he sticks his nose in and brings them here, and they're usually not that good. You wanted me to talk about Carmelo Anthony, Stephon Marbury, right? We can keep on going on and on about the guys that Dolan brought in because he wanted them and went over the GM's head. That's what Cohen's doing. All right. Not saying that Dolan and Cohen are relatable, because I guarantee you if Dolan didn't have a salary cap, he would buy every big free agent and the Knicks might actually win, but you just don't know, right? Baseball's not like that. You can't just buy stars and win. Doesn't work like that. Let's see. Well, Michael, I understand it's the exact same lineup, but that exact same lineup won 101 games last year. So for people who keep on talking about, the Mets, they got the same lineup. Well, they won 101 games last year, and that was without a third baseman, DH, and catcher that provided basically no offense for the entire year. And they heavily relied upon Alonso and Lindor and no other run producers. Now, if you get something at least a little bit better from third base, DH, or catcher, you can only assume that the lineup can be better, right? Escobar had a terrible year, but still hit 20 home runs. Now, unfortunately, he hit a lot of those home runs in the later part of the second half in late August into September, but he still hit 20 home runs and was one of our best guys going down the stretch. So if Escobar, I think Escobar really tried too hard last year. I think he just tried to do everything without actually trying to be himself. And I think the Escobar we seen later in the year is the guy that he was offensively. And remember, he was the guy that was supposed to protect Pete Alonso in the fifth spot. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Escobar in there in the fifth spot once again. So for people going crazy about the 101 Mets lineup, they actually won 101 games, even though it was the same lineup. No matter if you don't like this lineup or not, they still won 101 games. And let's not talking about starting pitching, because starting pitching, your ace of your staff that was nowhere to be found for the first half in Jacob deGrom didn't pitch, and Scherzer was out for about 6 weeks. So in total, your rotation didn't have your two aces for about 11 to 12 weeks out of the year, and your lineup picked up the slack. And teams seem to forget about that. For the majority of the year, your lineup was picking up the slack. Remember, the second half, the lineup wasn't as good, but the rotation was the one that was faltering down the stretch, not the lineup. The lineup was not scoring as much runs, but they actually got us to the point where we were in first place nearly the entire year. And when you're asking for Trevor Williams and David Peterson and McGill to start opening day, well, you have to look at the two aces of the staff that didn't pitch for about 12 weeks out of the year combined. That's a problem. So this lineup that nobody seems to like and is the same lineup won 101 games last year. You got to remember, guys, teams in the NL East, the Braves, as good as their lineup was, won the same amount of games as the Mets. And the Phillies, yeah, they got Justin Turner, they got Taijuan Walker, they got more bullpen help, but they also have to gain 14 games to reach the Mets and the Braves. Now, not saying teams are going to win 100 games this year again, but you might not need that, right? Because you don't know how the season is going to go. So there's a lot to look at just by looking at that. Michael Caputo, well, yeah, but let's not compare the Yankees lineup to the Mets lineup, because the Mets lineup is better than the Yankees lineup. And that's just obvious, right? You have the same team as last year. And there's no doubt that offensively, it's going to go down more because of the fact that you're expecting Judge to not hit 62 home runs. You're probably going to take about 15 home runs away probably. So if he hits 45 to 50, well, that's 12 home runs, 13 home runs, 16 home runs less, and that's less RBIs. And, right now, it looks like Donaldson and Hicks could be in your starting lineup next year. So, yeah, the pitching that wasn't the problem for the Yankees is what they upgraded on. And I don't see how much that's going to help you down the road, to be honest with you. So, well, you see, Michael, the problem with a lot of Yankee fans is they're absolutely delusional. And they always just assume that, Donaldson's going to change his ways. And, Rodon, they make Rodon like he's Cy Young, and he's not. He's a guy that had 2 good years, really good years, but he's been hurt almost every year of his career except for last year. So, yeah, like I said, Yankee fans are very delusional. And that's not just being a biased Met fan. That's a fact. So, I don't know. But when it comes back to the Mets, when you talk about the same lineup, that lineup won 101 games last year, right? No matter what you thought about the month of September, they basically carried this team when deGrom and Scherzer were out. And when they were scoring 4.5 runs a game in almost every month except for August and September, and then you needed your pitching staff to back up when they were all healthy, they faltered. So it's almost unfortunate to just say, well, the Braves have a better lineup. Well, yeah, if the Braves have so much of a good lineup, they only won 101 games last year, just like the Mets, right? I still think the Mets rotation is better than the Braves, and the Braves bullpen that was supposed to be a juggernaut last year was not as good. So they got starting rotation questions. They also have bullpen questions, because now that you're moving Iglesias to the closer's role, now remember, Iglesias was their 7th and 8th inning guy when Jensen was their 9th inning guy and their closer. And now that Iglesias is going to get pushed to the closer role, where is their 7th, 8th inning guys? And their rotation, they were looking to possibly trade Max Fried, who is the ace of their staff. And Spencer Strider, I don't care how good his stuff is, that guy is a ticking time bomb, in my opinion. He's wild. If you don't swing at his junk, he is wild. And when he pitched in the biggest games, he faltered as well. And I don't think their lineup, their rotation is as good. And we keep on talking about everybody. You hear Brave fans who are just as delusional as Yankee fans that are saying, "Oh, let Swanson go. We got Grossman." They just assume that everybody they plug in, just because it happened a few times, is going to work out. You have to replace Swanson, who was one of your most clutch hitters in the month of September and in the down the stretch, and he destroyed teams in the NL East, especially the Mets. Every time the Mets faced the Braves later in the year, it seemed like Swanson always came through, especially in that game. The last 3 games of the series, it was always Swanson doing something. So, they lost Freddie Freeman and Swanson in back-to-back years. You can't tell me that's just not going to make that team, hurt that team a little bit. It has to. So, why does everybody think that the Braves, who 2021 and 2022 started terribly, and then when they get hot in the second half, we automatically assume that's the team that they should be? Well, why aren't they the team that they were in the first half, but everybody just assumes they're the team of the second half? Because if you're going to go with that motto and that method, well, then the Yankees should have won the World Series based on their first half, not their second half. So which team are they? Are they the first half Brave or the second half Braves? Because teams that have terrible first halves and hot second halves, or vice versa, doesn't automatically make them a really good team. That shows me that they're very inconsistent. Just because the Braves got hot at the right time doesn't mean that they're a great team because they got hot at the right time in 2021. Right? And the same thing that goes for the Phillies, right? The Phillies were garbage all year. They hung on by the skin of their teeth to make the playoffs, and they got hot at the right time. So automatically, the Phillies are just supposed to be a team that's great, and they're still going to be missing Harper for 2 or 3 months out of the season. So they gain Turner, but they still lose Harper once again. So once again, the Mets, even in September, they struggled. They still were extremely good throughout the majority of the year until they got to September. They weren't terrible, but they should have won more games in September. But we look at the Braves and say, oh, they're a great team. But 2 years in a row, they were completely terrible in the first half. And the same thing with the Phillies. They were terrible for majority of the year. And 87 wins is nothing to brag about. Because if they made the playoffs and were one and done, it would have been like, oh, well, they just snuck into the playoffs and they weren't that good anyway. But because they got hot at the right time, we automatically assumed they're contenders all of a sudden. When, the Mets in 2015, when everybody just assumed they made the World Series, so 2016, well, they got to be better than that. Well, they weren't. And before we give people the throne and give people a championship, let's look how they got to where they got. Not just the fact that 2 years in a row that the Braves were terrible in the first half. And in 2021, if there was any competent teams in the NL East, the Braves probably would have never won the NL East, let alone winning the division and possibly going on that run. Last year, they had to fight their way back to win a division against the Mets, and they ran out of gas in the playoffs when they faced the Phillies. And that's just what happens, right? The Braves didn't get hot at the right time. They got beat by a hot team at the right time. So before we go crazy and anointing teams the best in a division, let them do it. And that's including the Mets. They're not going to be left off the hook here, because I'm one to make sure I criticize my Mets, because it wouldn't be fair to criticize other teams if I don't criticize my own. Hold on. Let's see. Brandon, Max and Verlander are old, and Saga is a question mark. I agree with you with Saga, question mark, no doubt. But Verlander did win the Cy Young last year. Like, let's not act like just because he's 39 years old and he pitched more than Scherzer, he pitched more than deGrom, and he pitched more games than most pitchers in baseball last year. And remember, he didn't hurt his groin or his oblique or his shoulder. He had Tommy John surgery, which is a cold now in baseball. You reattach it, you give yourself enough time to recover, and you basically have a new arm. And Verlander talked about it. He even in his press conference, he even said he feels like he has a new arm. He rehabbed it, took a little bit longer to rehab his arm, and when he came back last year, he felt like he felt like his arm was 10 years younger. So if he's been healthy in his career, and the last couple of years he's been healthy, and the only injury he had is a torn ACL and had Tommy John surgery, I'm more worried about Max Scherzer, his oblique, and him staying healthy than Verlander. The difference with Verlander is that he'll actually pitch, unlike Jacob deGrom. Remember, when Scherzer went down, we got concerned because we didn't have deGrom yet. That was the problem that we were having. I trust Verlander more than I would ever trust deGrom staying on the mound, especially as a Met. So that's something that we have to look at as well. So it's okay for Max and Verlander, we can talk about being old, but yet you got young pitchers that can't stay on the mound too, right? See how everybody's praising the Yankees with Carlos Rodon? Well, he's been injured every year of his career, but everybody's giving him a standing ovation. But nobody is giving, any praise to the Mets for signing Verlander when Verlander was still a free agent. We heard the Yankees, We heard the Phillies. We heard many teams, 4 or 5 of them, that were going after Justin Verlander. But if any other team would have got him, they would have got a standing ovation and got the praise. But when the Mets get him, oh, look, another old guy. Well, you can't have that narrative if you don't keep that same energy for every team that gets somebody, right? We talk about Correa, right? Everybody's praising the Minnesota Twins for signing Carlos Correa, but yet 2 big market teams weren't willing to pay Carlos Correa in the Mets and the Giants. But they get lambasted for not signing Correa, but everybody's praising the Minnesota Twins. You can't have that energy with certain teams and not have it with other teams. And once again, there was a lot of teams after Max Scherzer last 2 off seasons ago, right? When Scherzer was a free agent, right? The Dodgers were still on him. A couple other teams were still on him. When the Mets signed Max Scherzer, the Mets got an old guy, and then they got a guy in deGrom that's always hurt. And then we talk about that, but yet if the Dodgers would have re-signed Scherzer, oh, great job. You see what I'm saying here? So the narrative is totally different, because when you see a team like the Dodgers, who seem to make smart moves but can never get over the hump, and the pandemic year we all know is garbage. But if the Dodgers would have signed Verlander, oh, great move. Nobody will talk about the age. Everybody will be talking about his Cy Young. But because he's a Met, and now he's old all of a sudden, but yet last year he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Nobody cared about his age then. Now we're talking about his age now. Not saying that Justin Verlander is going to be a Cy Young this year, right? He had a little over a 2 ERA last year. I'm not looking for Verlander to be another Cy Young Award winner. Don't look at the money that was given. This is just what those type of pitchers are getting. That's what the market says. But if Verlander gives you under a 3 ERA, say 2.8, 2.9, he'll probably still be one of the best pitchers in baseball with that ERA. And the same thing with Scherzer. Before Scherzer went down, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. He was on the top 2 in Cy Young before he got injured. So let's not act like these guys are broken down and can't pitch. Scherzer was excellent until he got hurt. Verlander won a Cy Young last year. Even if those guys are a little bit worse than they were last year, but they stay healthy, they'll still be the 2 best pitchers in baseball, or at least one of them. So let's not go crazy. Like I'm saying, everybody was in on Senga, and now all of a sudden, like, Senga is automatically not all of a sudden is a question mark now. Every team that was going after him, the Padres, the Dodgers were looking after him, the Braves a little bit, the Yankees were in on him. But the Mets get him. Now, all of a sudden, it's like a mystery that all of a sudden he's a question mark. Every team knew he's a question mark. Nobody knows if he's going to be in major leagues, but there was numerous teams after him. But because the Mets get him, all of a sudden everybody got to throw that narrative that he's a question mark. Well, obviously, but he would have been a question mark for the Padres, the Yankees, this team, and that team. But because he's a Met, it's a bad move. You see what I'm saying here? And that's where the narrative is so annoying, because just because he's wearing orange and blue doesn't mean that he's a bigger question mark if he was wearing brown and yellow of the Padres. Of course he would be. So, like, I just don't. This is what I don't like about some reporters, some analysts from other teams, and some fans of other teams, including Met fans, because Correa, who most fans wanted him to be a Met, were so happy when he was a Met, including myself. But all of a sudden, he signs with the Twins. Oh, he was going to be used goods anyway. That's the narrative that Met fans are going to do all of a sudden. When 98% of Met fans were so happy that the Mets were going to get Correa. But because he's a Twin now, oh, he's used goods. He's going to break down anyway. It can't work that way. Keep the same energy for every player, every situation. Because if he's on the Padres in Senga, so he's not a question mark anymore, but he's a Met. Oh, we got to worry about the question mark. Same thing that goes for Verlander, right? Teams were in on Verlander. The Mets got Verlander. All of a sudden, everybody's talking about his age. Everybody's talking about, oh, well, he had Tommy John. Well, he had Tommy John last year, too, coming back, and he won a Cy Young, right? Why were we talking about that when he was the best pitcher in baseball, when he was pitching in the World Series for the Houston Astros? Can't work both ways. Michael, what team won the offseason? That's a good one. Um, hmm. That's a good question. Uh, I don't think the Mets had a terrible offseason. I don't. I would give them like a B plus. Obviously Correa would have probably got them to like an A minus. Again, the Mets offseason is not over yet. It seems like the Braves and the Phillies are done making moves. I think the Phillies are up there for sure. But, again, the Phillies signed Taijuan Walker, who would have been a better suited for the Mets rotation and that ballpark in Citi Field when he is prone to giving up home runs. He's going to a bandbox at Citizens Bank, which his home runs are going to go up. And he had a little under it. What is it? 3.3 ERA last year with the Mets. All likelihood, it's going to go up. So that's their number 3 starter, most likely, that is going to have close to a 4 ERA. So I don't necessarily think the Phillies had a great offseason. I mean, they got Trey Turner, who is a nice piece for them. But what the Phillies need was what Turner brings, which is getting on base, stealing some bases. Because the biggest problem with the Phillies last year for the majority of the year was they hit a ton of solo home runs because they couldn't get people on base. There's a lot of strikeouts in that lineup. Turner, even though he gets on base, is a big strikeout guy as well. So, again, I wanted Turner for the Mets, so I'm not killing Turner, but let's not act like Turner isn't what he is, because he's a speed guy who gets on base, but he does strike out a ton, which the Phillies lineup already does. He's gonna help them tremendously because he gets on base for them big boppers. So we'll see where that turns out. But I don't think Walker is an upgrade for the Phillies, because I think Taijuan Walker needs to be in a bigger ballpark, because he tends to see he's set up to be a ground ball pitcher. But when he doesn't have his stuff, and even when he's pitching well, he's still prone to giving up the home run ball. And there was a lot, if you watch Taijuan Walker, especially last year, he gave up a lot of long fly balls that were caught at the warning track. Those warning track balls at Citi Field are over the fence at Citizens Bank Park. So it's unfortunate that people are just anointing the Phillies just because they made one big move this offseason position player wise, and just automatically assume without Harper for a couple of months again that they're automatically going to be the team that is going to fight for the NL East, when they still have to catch the Mets and the Braves, right? The Mets, for the most part, stayed pat in their lineup, but the Mets completely destroyed the Phillies in the season. And even with Turner, how many more games would the Phillies would have won against the Mets during that season? So we also have to look at that as well. Now, we're not going to worry about the NL East as much because you play them only 13 times this year with the balanced schedule instead of the normal 19 times. So you're not going to get a lot of divisional games now, and you're going to be playing more teams outside your division, which might help all 3 teams in the NL East because you might be playing worse teams. So that's something that I think I would have to say the Phillies. You know what? It's hard. I could put probably the Phillies, the Padres, and the Mets. But some people might say the Rangers, they made pretty good signings, right? But I would say the Padres 1, the Phillies 2, and the Mets 3. Brandon, yes, I agree with that. So yeah, but you know what? If Max and Verlander go down, it was basically similar to last year when deGrom was out for a half a year and Max was out for 6 weeks. So if they went down, that 75-win team you're talking about, well, I wouldn't say that, because that is the same team that lost 2 of their top pitchers last year and still won 101 games. And oh, by the way, the backup that they were using for that rotation when Scherzer couldn't pitch an opening day was McGill, who was also injured. So I think the Mets, if they can keep Peterson and McGill on the back burner, if those guys go down, you can put those in. Not saying that they're Verlander or Scherzer, but they can be very competent. And, we got to remember, deGrom and Scherzer were down for 12 weeks out of the whole season, and the Mets still won 101 games with, oh, by the way, the same lineup. So they're not necessarily a 75-win team if Verlander and Max Scherzer don't stay healthy because, well, look what happened last year when 2 of your aces went down for 12 weeks and the Mets still won 101 games. Steve, my cohort is only on the Sunday show, buddy. But let me just talk about that for a second about my boy Mike, right? It just so happens that starting the show on a Sunday into the new year ended up being a very important games for the Giants. I mean, last week wasn't the last game of the season wasn't important because the Giants had nothing to play for, but he was at a watch party for the Giants both times, right? And it's unfortunate, and I know there was a lot of people in the comments that weren't happy with that about the noise and everything like that, but we're all sports fans, right? We know how it is when you go to a bar or a watch party. You know, this is not something that he's doing on a regular basis. It just so happens it was on a Sunday. I have this show at 6 o'clock, and the Giants were playing at that time. So, look, Mike, in his element, you know, when he's on and in his house, in his room, talking Mets, he knows his stuff, and he's going to be a good addition to the channel. I promise you that. It was just in a situation where he was at watch parties, and it just so happens it wasn't great content. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's hard to do that when you got noise in the background, but there wasn't much he can do. And he wanted to come on. You know, I asked him, I'm like, do you want to come on or you just want to enjoy? You know, he could have just enjoyed his night, drink some beer, take a couple of shots, watch the Giant game with the guys that I know from the 7 line that are Giant fans as well. He could have done that, but he still wanted to come on the channel and talk Mets baseball. So I got to give him a little bit of credit for that. He didn't have to do that, and he did. So trust me, it's going to get better, that show. I know some people weren't happy with it, but trust me, it will get better. All right, I'm just checking the comments, guys. Give me a second. Well, Brandon, I guess so, but I mean, the Bluebirds might come out, but we also watched the Phillies and Braves have terrible first halves and do completely different things in the second half. So the Bluebirds might come out, but also give this team the benefit of the doubt as well, because of the fact, you know, you talk to Met fans, you know, it acts like we're in the Wilpon era again, the way they act, like we won 75 games last year and had no chance at the playoffs. Like, as we didn't have our 2 main starting pitchers, aces, for 12 weeks out of the season, and you had the Trevor Williams of the world, spot starts by David Peterson, McGill going down, who was going to be in this rotation. You know, we had 3 guys that we were expected to be in this rotation that weren't in the rotation for a lot of the time. So why are we acting like this team won 75 games last year and we didn't? And that was without a healthy ace and a number 2 that wasn't healthy either. So before we just think that we're going to be bad, we started off great, and where did that end up at the end of the year? You know, sometimes it might be better to finish extremely strong instead of being extremely strong in the beginning of the year and then slow down a little bit at the end of the year, right? Because clearly that recipe didn't work, right? 2 years in a row, the Braves weren't very good in the first half, and they came tumbling down like a boulder in the second half, and they won the division. The division last year. In 2021, they won the World Series. So just because they might not start great in the first half doesn't mean they can't go buck wild in the second half and do what the Phillies and the Braves did the last couple of years. It's possible. You know, like you said, Brandon, before, it might not matter what you do in the beginning of the year. You know, I'm not saying you have to be a complete disaster, but what if the Mets have, you know, an okay first half where they're about 3-4 games out of first place, maybe 5 or 6, as you say, and then in the second half they go guns blazing and they storm back, and now they get hot at the right time, and now it's a whole nother ball game. So, you know, there's no exact method onto how to win a World Series or get to where you want to go, right? You know, it's been very similar over the last couple of years, probably over the last 5, that if you get hot at the right time, especially in the month of September, and you ride that wave into the playoffs, it's very likely you'll probably get to the World Series. It's been like that for the last 5-6 years. So we don't necessarily know or give an actual method of this is how it's supposed to be. Because if the Mets have a bad first half and they're struggling, but in the second half they come guns blazing and they come in hot, get into the playoffs, and then they go on a run, right? The Mets 2015 first half, people were looking to fire people. People wanted that big bat. It was almost Carlos Gomez, and then it ended up being Yoenis Cespedes, and then the second half, the Mets took off. So, we are a product of what the Braves did and the Phillies did the last couple of years. It's just that the Braves won the World Series and the Phillies and the Mets did it. So, if you look at the 2015 Mets, who were complete garbage in the first half, but as soon as they made the trade for Cespedes and a couple of bullpen arms, it lifted them into the playoffs and made that big run. Well, Verlander, I'm sorry, Garcia, exactly. 1.7 last year he had under a 2 ERA. So even if he has a full run higher in a 2.75 ERA, he'll still be one of the better pitchers in baseball. I think most of us will take under a 3 ERA from Verlander, say a 2.8 ERA, when it's very possible that he can, I don't expect Verlander. If you're expecting Verlander to have a year like he had last year, then you're going to be disappointed. I don't look at it like that. I look at it like, all right, Verlander, Cy Young, under a 2 ERA. Give me an under 3 ERA and stay healthy. He could pitch 30 innings. 30 games this year for us. The Mets are going to be at the top of the division. I don't know if they'll win the division, but they'll definitely be in the playoffs. And that's where we have to look at it like that. Scherzer needs to not give. See, I think the problem, what happened with Scherzer last year, and I honestly believe this is the God's honest truth. I think when deGrom went down in spring training, Scherzer put all the pressure on him, and he felt like everything he had to do was go out there and give 200% every single time, when he felt like he had to put the team on his back because deGrom is down. And when Scherzer didn't pitch on open day and McGill did, I think Scherzer put added pressure on himself. And I do think the fact that putting all that pressure on him and putting all that weight on him, he tried too much to do more than what he should be doing. I guarantee you're going to see Scherzer this year, especially early on, not give 200%. He'll still have great games, but you know what? When he'll pitch 6 innings in April, in the middle of April, and, say, all right, let me not push it, and then give it to your bullpen that should be good. It's simple things like that can give you innings later on in the season. And I think Scherzer is going to be healthier this year because of the fact he knows that what he did last year was putting too much on his plate when he necessarily didn't have to. He felt like deGrom is out and he had to be the workhorse of the rotation when all you had to do is be Max Scherzer. You don't have to be that workhorse because you had guys behind you that were giving you innings, such as Walker and Chris Bassett. Michael, the Braves did get Murphy, and if you look at the stats offensively from d'Arnaud and Murphy, they're very similar. Obviously, Murphy is the better catcher, defensively, and he got a better arm than d'Arnaud. But d'Arnaud had just as good of a year offensively than Murphy did. And I don't see where there's much of a difference, to be honest with you. Honestly, like defensively, yes, Murphy's better than d'Arnaud. But offensively, d'Arnaud and Murphy have very similar stats, and d'Arnaud had a couple of better stats overall than Murphy. So I don't think Murphy is going to be that much better than d'Arnaud offensively. So I'm putting that even though, Murphy's stardom is because we look at catches in a whole different ballgame. There's only like 3 or probably like 5 catches in all baseball that are really damn good. And Murphy's one of those. But a good offensive player, but he's just as good as d'Arnaud offensively. He's just better defensively. And that'll probably help the Braves, but it's not like d'Arnaud was a butcher behind the plate. He wasn't. Kyle, Ranger Suarez, yeah, he's a good pitcher too, but you don't sign Walker for almost $18 million a year and make him your number 4. He's probably going to be your number 3. Brandon, I agree. Father Time is undefeated, but it's not like Scherzer and Verlander were pitching bad, right? Last year, Verlander pitched great all year. Scherzer was one of the best pitchers in baseball until he hurt his oblique. And I said to this last year, and I said this about Scherzer a couple of minutes ago. Scherzer, I think, tried to go 200 miles an hour in every start early on, and I think it led up to that oblique injury. I'm telling you right now, he's going to have a whole different mindset. Coming to New York last year, he felt like he had to do more than what we know he can be. And he was great when he pitched. I think when he got hurt and then when he came back probably a little bit too early, he hurt himself. Let's see. I'm just looking at the comments, guys. Give me a second. I know we're completely off topic with the topics, but that's all right. It's more fun when we interact a little bit more. Let's see. Well, Brandon, people commented about the show on Sunday. Again, this wasn't planned. Again, this is just the way it happened, and the scheduling just happened to be the Giants were playing. And, I'm not going to tell Mike, hey, either pick the watch party or pick me. I'm not doing that. All right. We're sports fans. If there was a Mets watch party, I'd be there. Right. And if you wanted me on the channel, I'm going to be on the channel. Dodgers won the offseason. Sure. Well, David, considering there's not much left, I'd rather have Profar than a guy like Tommy Pham. Profar can play all over. He can play many outfield positions, a couple of infield positions. He's a switch hitter, got a little bit of speed. It's not the number 1 choice from the earlier 2 weeks ago, but I think Profar could be a good addition. But we haven't heard any rumors about the Mets and Profar. We've been hearing rumors about Tommy Pham more than actual Profar. So I don't know what the Mets are doing, to be honest with you. Victor, I'm glad you like it on Sunday. Hopefully you keep on coming back for it. Ramon, opinion about bullpen arm and hitter. Well, if you heard Eppler today, he talked about getting another bat and also a bullpen arm that he's talking to a lot of agents regarding those 2 positions. So I do think that we're going to get another bullpen arm. Who knows? I was thinking about Chafin many times. Let's do that. We heard about Zach Britton, but Zach Britton is represented by Scott Boras. We don't know the relationship between Boras and Cohen and Eppler at this point. So I don't know if Britton's going to be an option. I think the Mets still should go after Chafin as well, but they might just get a guy like Fulmer as well. I don't know. I think they should get Chafin. And again, the bats are limited. It's either going to be Profar or Pham or none of them, and they're going to go with Alvarez or Beatty. I don't know. Tom, this is what I agree with. I do think the midseason trade deadline will make or break this team just like it did last year. Again, there comes a time when your team is good enough to contend for a World Series. The Mets were top 3 in baseball last year. Went top 3 and 4 all year. And when he got to the deadline and you're in first place, you were in first place for 7 or 8 games at the deadline. And you are one of the best teams in baseball. You have to make yourself better. Even if you don't want to give up anybody in your top 25, sometimes you have to take a little bit of the risk to make your team better. And I think that's where they fail. So me and Tom are in agreement. The Mets, everybody goes to September and saying, oh, the Mets lost in September because they couldn't beat the bad teams. They lost the division, and they lost a special thing they had going on. I really thought they would be big contenders for the World Series. But when it came to the trade deadline, that absolutely killed any type of momentum that they could have took on to the second half. that really hurt them down the stretch in late August into September. Make or break is the trade deadline. They have to make moves if they're needed. Now, if everybody's healthy and the rotation's doing well, the bullpen's doing well, the lineup's looking good, maybe even Vogelback and Ruff actually look like they can hit a ball out of the ballpark and things are going well, and maybe we don't need a big bat at the deadline, and maybe we need maybe one more bullpen arm to solidify this bullpen a little bit more. You got to make the move. There was a missing piece last year that the Mets could have had. Even though we were looking for bullpen arms, but the bullpen actually was better in the second half than it was in the first half. But if they could have got that one more bat, if they would have got that Chris Drury, and maybe JD Martinez would have been better with another team if he would have got traded instead of staying in Boston. Because people look at JD Martinez like, oh, look at his second half. He was terrible. Well, when you were going to get traded to a contender and you ended up being at a team like Boston who wasn't going anywhere, well, I would play bad too. And he still got a 2-year deal with the Dodgers. So the Mets screwed up last year at the trade deadline. I think every momentum, every opportunity they had to put another bat, which they needed in that lineup, with an already championship caliber team, they failed. And I think that was the biggest reason why they failed last year. We can blame the pitching staff. We can blame the offense. But the offense carried this team throughout the entire year. But when it came down where we needed a little bit of help in the rotation to pick it up, they did it in the last part of the year. Trade deadline is going to be make or break this year. 100% agree, Tom. Let's see. Dora, how you doing? Well, Rocky, yeah, I mean, we have to look at that, right? What if Beatty and Alvarez did like what Alonso did in 2019 spring training when the Mets weren't really thinking about bringing Alonso up to the big leagues in 2019, but because he had a crazy spring training and was hitting every ball he can out of the ballpark and just being dominant offensively, the Mets had no choice. If Brett Beatty and Alvarez give the Mets no choice because they played so well at the plate and give the Mets no choice to bring them up, well, maybe we do have that bat. But in my opinion, I always like the known player, the player that I know based on history and based on his career who can perform. Just because Alvarez is the number one prospect in all of baseball doesn't mean he's going to be that bat that the Mets need, right? I don't think Alvarez is ever going to hit for average. So if he's going to give me a 220 average and strike out a ton, but just hit home runs, well, how many home runs? If he's Schwarber, who hits 220, hits 45 home runs, all right, well, you know what? Let's talk. But is Alvarez going to be a 40 home run guy? Nobody knows that. But if he's a 25 home run guy and he bats 220 and strikes out a lot, well, he's Adam Duvall. So, Brett Beatty, the same thing. I don't think Brett Beatty's going to be a huge power hitter. I think he's going to be like a 260, 265 hitter that hits 18 to 20 home runs. Well, that's basically everything the Mets have in their lineup, right? A bunch of 16, 15 to 20 home run guys that bats around 260. That's like everybody in their lineup except for two guys. So, like, what are we missing here? Right? So the big bats can be from Beatty and Alvarez or somebody else. Maybe Mauricio. You never know. But what those players, those prospects of the Mets have to do is go into spring training and have a spring training like Pete Alonso did that gave the Mets no choice but to bring them up. If they do that, maybe we have something there. But we have to wait and see it before we actually, just give these guys, a major league roster spot and make them be a big part of this. So we'll see. All right, so let me just look at the rest of it, guys. So we got a couple of minutes left. Josh Bell would have been a good fit. That's true. Hey, Ken. Well, yeah, Nimmo did have a career year last year. But, people talk about Aaron Judge. People talk about many other players who had career years in their contract year. But when Nimmo does it, it's like, oh, he's just going to be great, right? There's a lot of players that had career years in their contract year. Judge just had one, right? Judge got paid for what he did last year. Nimmo got an 8-year contract for what he did last year. Now, can Nimmo repeat that? Let's hope so. Let's hope he has a year like he had last year. Let's hope he stays healthy, because all of a sudden Nimmo stays healthy in his contract year, just like Judge. If he doesn't stay healthy, well, what does that tell you, right? But let's just hope Nimmo stays healthy, right? I think Nimmo is a pretty good player who needs to stay healthy, right? Nimmo's injured almost. I don't care if it's hit by a pitch or how you got hurt. You're injured. If you don't help the team because you're injured, no matter which way you go, right? Aaron Judge and Brandon Nimmo, two guys that can't stay healthy in their career, all of a sudden, the nagging injuries that they usually stay out of the lineup for are now in the lineup with those nagging injuries. All of a sudden, they're not injured, played the most amount of games in their career in a contract year. But if they stay healthy, this is Nimmo. He stays healthy and stays on the field with those nagging injuries, gives me 130, 140 games, and be the Nimmo that we know offensively, there's no complaints from me. I'm just looking at the lineups. Alrighty. Ken, no. Number of games, no. But when you talk about a guy who is often injured, you're not a good player if you're not on the field. We talked about this with years with Aaron Judge, right? He's a great player, but if he doesn't play, then what are you, right? deGrom could be the best pitcher in baseball, right? Everybody just believes he is, but if you're not on the field to pitch, well, your greatness or your really good player or, a really good player is not a really good player if you're not on the field. Well, Ken, Nimmo's not going to have a good arm. We know that. Average center fielder, he's not an average center fielder anymore because of analytics. But I like Nimmo as an offensive player. The reason why he got an 8-year deal was because of what he did offensively. If he stays healthy, Nimmo is obviously perfect for the Mets as a leadoff hitter. We'll just have to wait and see. But, I mean, if you look at Nimmo's career, he doesn't stay healthy. He stood healthy last year, coincidentally, in a contract year, just like Aaron Judge and just like many other players. And that's why you have to be concerned about a guy who is often injured and in his contract year all of a sudden stays healthy miraculously, and he had a good year because, well, if you're a good player and you play a lot of games, you're probably going to have a really good year, right? You're a good player, really good player. If you stay on the field, you're going to have the numbers, especially if you are a good player. Can Nimmo be better than he was last year? I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, it would be great, but I don't see him being anything more than what he was last year. So anything less than last year is a downgrade. But we'll see. I put down Nimmo because you guys act like he is he's an all-star type player. And, he might be at his position, but look at around Major League Baseball. There's not a lot of good center fielders. But he doesn't stay healthy. He stood healthy 1 year of his career last year. And that's why people, again, if Nimmo has another year like last year, then the Mets, that's a huge bonus for the Mets. But he's never had a year like he did last year. You know why? Because he never stayed healthy. And if he stays healthy, then he probably can have a year like he had last year. But there was years when he could have played through nagging injuries and didn't. Last year, he played through everything. Even when, he made a diving catch and came up limping a little bit or running the bases and tweaked something, he played. Well, you're going to have the numbers if you're a good player. Nimmo needs to stay on the field. Listen, if Nimmo plays less than 140 games, the Mets are in big trouble. Because we saw what happened when a guy like Marte, who was a big piece of the puzzle at the top of the lineup, went down. Where was Nimmo? Right? When Nimmo needed to pick up his game, when Marte was gone, he had a bad September. Compared to his other months, he wasn't as good. And that was when we needed him the most, when Marte was down. And listen, we can talk about Marte, we can talk about Verlander, Max, Nimmo. If they all stay healthy, the Mets are going to have a really good year. Nimmo is a really good player when he's healthy. Let me see him be healthy for 2 years in a row. And then we can start talking about Nimmo like everybody else is talking about Nimmo, especially Ken and among others. Nimmo's a good player. But Nimmo also has flaws when nobody wants to bring them up. And they happen, right? Ken, you can remember this. During the season when Nimmo was struggling, what did you used to type? Oh, here comes a strikeout from Nimmo. He's not taking a lot of pitches. When Nimmo struggles, he doesn't take pitches and he strikes out. Two things when he's on, it's impossible to do that against Nimmo. It's hard to strike him out and it's hard to get him out in earlier than counts. He always goes deep in the counts. Nimmo is the player that when he's off his game is basically a guy that can look like a bench player, a fourth outfielder. But Nimmo narrowed that down a lot last year. But I do think if he can stay healthy, let's see Nimmo stay healthy for 2 years in a row. Because McNeil made me shut my mouth last year. He completely changed what he did in 2021. He tried to be a home run hitter in 2021. 2022, we went back to the McNeil we always know. So if Nimmo can stay healthy this year, and he's got 2 healthy years under his belt, why would I be shocked that he can have another year like last year? Because I think Nimmo's game works well with the Mets, and I think offensively he's really good. But if he misses 20 to 30 games, well, that's been the same problem with Nimmo his entire career. And now he's another year older. But we'll see. We'll see. Well, Dor, I agree with that. But I don't care what other teams think of Nimmo, right? The same teams who like Ken, yeah, he was bad in September mostly. Again, stop putting Nimmo on this pedestal. A guy who's been healthy, right? Dor, Ken, how do you like Rodon? Just asking. How do you like Rodon? Right? You're going to say he's not healthy for the majority of his career. Well, Nimmo hasn't either. Right? Nimmo's best year was last year. Rodon's best year was last year. So, well, Ken, you never talk bad about Nimmo. That's the problem, Ken. That's the problem. Stop putting Nimmo as this great player when he's a good player. Well, committee, he's probably going to the Red Sox. At least that was the last rumor. Nimmo's a good player. But can we not anoint him? Let him have another healthy season and put up the numbers he did last year. Because offense is not the problem. But if he misses 30 games, well, we're back to square one. Well, I think the Mets overpaid Nimmo, to be honest with you. Right? 8 years is an absolute joke for Nimmo. I'm sorry. Right? Every projection was 5 or 6 years. the Mets clearly overpaid to keep him, which I have no problem with. If the Mets believe he's worth that, he better be healthy because you're going to have a $20 million guy missing 30 games at least next year. I'm sorry, he's not a $20 million player. Thor, yeah. I'm not saying worried. That's where I agree with you with. I do think Nimmo can grow as a hitter, but where grow? Average-wise? Because I don't think he's going to hit more home runs. I think he's going to get 14, 15 home runs, which is fine for a leadoff hitter. But if he can get his average up maybe 10 or 15 points, that's huge because that means he's getting on base even more than Nimmo already does. Well, Thor, I agree with you. That is the core of your team. Nimmo, McNeil, and Alonso are the core of your team. Okay, Ken, exactly. So a leadoff guy, you're looking for him to have a better on base, right? And a better average. Well, last year was his best average year, right? Great. If he has that again, now we're talking offensively even better. On base, I don't know. Because Nimmo, as a leadoff hitter, we can't have the terrible bouts that he has when he struggles badly because he doesn't do anything well when he struggles, right? The best thing he does is take pitches, takes walks, and gets on base, right? That's what he likes to do. But when he struggles, the things he does well is completely off the table. So he's not going to hit home runs, and he's probably not going to hit for average when he's struggling. And you see, that's what I'm saying, Ken. We need Nimmo to get on base more, right? I don't know if Nimmo's ever going to be stolen base happy. He might learn it this year because, well, he might not have a choice because when he can only throw over 3 times, you can take off. So I do think the fact that, can Nimmo grow? Of course. You could say that about every player, but can they get to that next level? But number 1 on the list, Nimmo needs to stay healthy for a second year because he hasn't done that in his career. If he doesn't do that, we talk about Correa and 12 years or even 6 years and him falling apart. Why don't nobody talk about Nimmo for 8 years when this guy can't stay healthy either? Right? We tend to forget about that too. If Nimmo learns how to steal and gets his on-base percentage up a little bit more, I mean, he can be one of the better offensive players in the game because Nimmo is very fast. We just don't see it because he don't steal bases and we don't talk about it. But if you ever see Nimmo go first to home, he's like a speeding bullet. He can be that good. Yeah, Teddy, I don't necessarily think the bases bigger are going to attract Nimmo to steal more bases. The throwing over less times, and he can only throw over 3 times, could make Nimmo somewhat of a base stealer, but he's never been a base stealer in his career. You can't just learn it. You got to get jumps at the right time. You got to get good jumps. If a guy's going to, throw from the stretch and, quick pitch or, have a short release to the plate, Nimmo's got to know when to take off. So when he never were confident in stealing bases, you still have to read pitches, even though they can't throw over. You still got to read pitches and get them at the right time, or you're going to get either picked off or you're going to be in between and you're not going to get the jump off because if the pitcher throws it quick to the plate and you don't get a good jump, well, guess what? You're not going to be a good base stealer. So if Nimmo's got to gain that confidence, I don't know if he can or if he will. I'm not going to say he can. I mean, I think everybody can get better. It's just if Nimmo is going to work harder to do that, which I think he can, that's a whole different part of his game that if he can add, watch out because he can be that good. And there's another reason why people talk about Nimmo not wanting to steal bases because there's been a lot of rumors that Nimmo does not want to get hurt because Nimmo knows he's injury prone. So stealing bases gives you more of a risk of hurting. If you go feet first, ankle knee issue, head first, hand issue, wrist issue, head issue, shoulder issue. There's been things that have been said over the years about Nimmo, that Nimmo doesn't want to get hurt, and that's why he doesn't like to steal bases. If that's true, well, why all of a sudden he's going to steal bases this year? We'll have to wait and see. So, guys, with that said, it's been fun for the last hour for Mets Hot Stove Live. We're going to see what the Mets do. According to Billy Eppler, still approaching the bat and still looking for a bullpen arm. He's still in negotiations with that. We'll see if the Mets do anything else. If they can get another bat and another arm in that bullpen and in that lineup, or at least a guy that can be a utility guy that can play everywhere. JL, I do play MLB The Show. I do think that if the Mets do those two things, again, we're not going to get the bat that we want, but if you get a Profar, guy can play all over the diamond, all over the field, outfield, infield, switch hitter, could be useful for this Mets. He got decent speed. Maybe that will help us on the base path. But I want Chafin. I want to see if the Mets are going to go after Chafin as well. So, once again, guys, tomorrow I will do another Mets Hot Stove Live at 6 p.m. I'm also going to do a video that's going to be posted around probably 4 or 5 o'clock about the 4 Mets that are in the top 100 of the MLB prospect list, and going to break that down a little bit and why I think it is a big difference from 2021 and 2022 Mets farm system until this year, because the Mets jumped a couple of spots in the rankings and farm systems, and we're going to talk about that in the video as well. So once again, guys, if you want to become a member of Talking Mets at Rob, just click on the join button or go to the channel page, click on join, and become a member of the channel. Members are automatically in the run-ins for any giveaways that I do on the channel. You do not have to donate to the channel because you already have a subscription to a membership, and you automatically enter to get an entry into any of the giveaways during the season and during the year. When I get the 5K subs, a giveaway is going to happen, so you're already in there for the mix. So once again, memberships are live. Just click on join button and become a member of the channel. Choose anyone you want, and we'll be ready to go. And another one, guys, once again, Mets Hot Stove Live tomorrow, 6 p.m. Check out my 4 Mets Top 100 in MLB Top 100 tomorrow around 5 o'clock. So with that said, guys, thank you for tuning in to Talking Mets and Rob. Mets Hot Stove Live, another one. 29 days, guys, until pitchers and catchers report to spring training. And we're just a little over a month away until the first game of spring training, and we can really get into the good stuff about baseball and not talking about trades and free agents and this and that. We get to talk about actual baseball on the field. With that said, everybody have a good night. As always, let's go Mets. See you next time, guys.
You'll find a Mets fan. Let's go. This is a Mets year for all your Mets here. Let's